Butter, it's delicious, it's creamy, and you'll find it in almost every kitchen around the world. But what if something so familiar, so comforting, carries a hidden risk? Today, we're diving deep into a massive 33-year study that involved over 200,000 people. The headline finding: eating butter might be associated with a higher risk of dying from cancer. So, what does this really mean? Does butter actually cause cancer? Is it safe to eat anymore? Or is the science being completely misunderstood? Stick around, because the truth is far more surprising and nuanced than you might think. Let's start by looking at what this huge study actually found. Researchers from Harvard tracked more than 200,000 healthcare professionals for over 3 decades. This wasn't just a one-time survey. They measured their diets repeatedly over the years and even checked their biological markers to get a clearer picture. And here's what they noticed. People who consumed higher amounts of butter, specifically 2 or more servings a day, had a 12% higher risk of dying from cancer compared to those who rarely ate it. They also saw a small but statistically significant increase in all-cause mortality, meaning death from any cause. But here's where it gets really interesting. The risk wasn't the same across the board. When people used butter for cooking or baking, say sorting vegetables or making a cake, the risk didn't seem to increase. However, when butter was used as a spread on bread or added on top of other foods, the association with cancer mortality became stronger. This detail is a crucial clue. It suggests that how we eat butter might be just as important as how much we eat. But before we jump to conclusions and throw out our butter dishes, there's a major plot twist we need to discuss. And here it is, the twist that changes everything. The study began way back in the 1980s and continued through the 90s, and during that time many food surveys didn't clearly separate butter from margarine. Participants were often asked about their margarine or butter intake as a single item. Why is this such a big deal? Because the margarine of the 1990s was a completely different product from what it is today. Back then, it was loaded with industrial trans fats. Trans fats are now recognized as one of the most dangerous substances ever added to our food supply. These artificial fats were created through a process called hydrogenation, which turned liquid oils into solid fats, and we now know they are incredibly harmful. Trans fats dramatically increase inflammation throughout the body. They damage the lining of our blood vessels, and they are strongly linked to an increased risk of heart disease and, yes, cancer. They were so detrimental to health that by the early 2000s, most countries began a process to ban them from the food supply entirely. So, think about it. If the study data lumped butter and this old-school trans-fat-laden margarine together, then the increased cancer risk they observed might have been caused by the trans fats in margarine, not the butter itself. This is a massive limitation, and the researchers themselves pointed out. It throws a huge wrench into the idea that butter is the villain here. Now, let's talk about another challenge with studies like this: confounding factors. Even though the researchers did a fantastic job trying to account for other lifestyle habits, it's almost impossible to isolate one single food and say it's the cause of a complex disease like cancer. The study did adjust for many important variables. They looked at alcohol intake, smoking status, family history of disease, physical activity levels, total calorie intake, and even the overall quality of the participants' diets. This is top-tier research. But even with all those adjustments, you can't control for everything. Think about the type of person who might eat a lot of butter on their bread. Perhaps they also tend to eat more white bread, processed meats, and sugary foods, while eating fewer vegetables. Maybe their lifestyle habits, in ways we can't even measure, are different. For example, maybe people who slather butter on everything are also more likely to have a more stressful job or get less sleep. It's incredibly difficult to untangle all these interconnected behaviors. So, what the study really shows is a correlation and association between higher butter intake and higher cancer mortality. It does not, and cannot, prove that butter causes the increased risk. That's a critical distinction. This also isn't the only study on the topic. So, what does the broader body of research say? A few other large analyses have also hinted at a possible link between high butter consumption and cancer mortality. The findings are not entirely isolated to this one study. However, the evidence is far from conclusive. Many other studies, particularly smaller ones, have found no increased risk at all. It's a mixed bag. A lot of the older studies have the same problem we just discussed. They didn't separate butter from margarine. Many also had a weaker design, only measuring diet once at the beginning and then following people for years, which is far less reliable than measuring diet repeatedly. The results are also inconsistent across different populations and different types of cancer. What might appear as a risk in one group of people doesn't show up in another. And here's a really important point to underline. None of this research provides any evidence that butter causes cancer to start. The concern raised in these studies is specifically about cancer progression and mortality. In other words, for someone who already has cancer, could a high intake of certain fats influence how the disease progresses? That's the real question being investigated. There is no evidence suggesting that eating butter will give you cancer. So, if there is a real biological effect, what could be happening in the body? Why might a high intake of butter, a saturated fat, be associated with worse cancer outcomes in some studies? There are a couple of leading theories. The first involves a powerful growth signaling pathway in our bodies called IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor 1. IGF-1 is like a fertilizer for our cells. It tells them to grow and divide. This is essential for normal growth, but in the context of cancer, high levels of IGF-1 can encourage cancer cells to grow and spread more aggressively. Some research suggests that diets high in saturated fat and certain dairy proteins can increase IGF-1 signaling. So, the theory is that a high butter intake might be creating a more favorable environment for existing cancer cells to thrive. The second theory focuses on fatty acids. Butter is rich in certain types of saturated fatty acids, like palmitic acid. Some lab studies have shown that high levels of palmitic acid can promote cancer metastasis, which is the process of cancer spreading to other parts of the body. Again, this is about cancer progression, not initiation. It's important to remember that these are just mechanisms observed in lab settings, and what happens in a petri dish doesn't always translate directly to the complex human body, but they offer potential explanations for the associations we see in population studies. So, after all that, what's the final verdict on butter? Is it safe to eat? The simple answer is yes. For most people, butter in moderation is perfectly fine. This study, despite the scary headlines it generated, does not prove that butter causes or worsens cancer. The confounding issue with trans fat-laden margarine from the past is a major problem with the data. What this research really highlights is the importance of our overall dietary pattern. A diet that is consistently high in saturated fats, processed foods and refined carbohydrates, while being low in fruits, vegetables and fiber, is associated with a higher risk for many chronic diseases, including cancer. No single food is going to be the hero or the villain. It's about the big picture. If you enjoy a bit of butter on your whole grain toast or use it to cook your vegetables, you don't need to worry. The key is balance. Focus on building a diet rich in whole, unprocessed foods. Eat plenty of colorful plants, lean proteins, and healthy fats from sources like olive oil, avocados, nuts, and seeds. Instead of fearing butter, think of it as a sometimes food. Enjoy it for its flavor in the context of an otherwise healthy and balanced diet. That's the real takeaway from decades of nutrition science. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the science of health and nutrition. See you next time.